Otherwise known as Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, this movie shows us what happens when an alternative to pesticides causes the dead to rise and seek out the living for food. This is my review of The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue. The movie begins at an antique shop owned by George Meaning, played by the late Ray Lovelock. He's off to the countryside for a relaxing weekend and client meeting. But first, he's got to make it through the smog-infested city where even a streaker doesn't get any reaction. It doesn't take long before there's a hiccup in his journey. This something, or rather someone, is Edna Simmons, played by Cristina Galbó. While George's bike can be fixed, it won't be anytime soon, so he commandeers Edna's car in order to make it to his cottage appointment on time. Unfortunately, there's a hiccup to be had there too. Edna has a time-sensitive matter to attend to involving her sister, so she begs George to take her there first. Naturally, they end up getting lost, so George goes to a nearby farm to ask for directions, where there seems to be some sort of scientific shit going on here.
It's supposed to destroy insects and parasites. This works solely by ultrasonic radiation. There's not a chemical involved.
This sonic whatever the fuck has some drastically adverse effects, like raising Guthrie, played by the late Fernando Hilbeck, from his wet grave to terrorize Edna, and disappear before George or the farmer can see him. Elsewhere, we meet Edna's sister, Katie, played by Janine Mestre, and her husband, Martin, played by Jose Laifente. They've got a rather strained relationship because Katie has a drug addiction, and Martin wants to get her professional help. Unfortunately, he's not going to get the chance. When the police arrive, the inspector, played by the late Arthur Kennedy, immediately suspect that Katie killed Martin under the influence of heroin. Edna comes up with an idea that would clear her sister of these suspicions: Martin's camera. During the attack, it was taking photos, so it should provide evidence of everything that Katie claims. Since George isn't one to trust the police, he takes the film to be developed in town. While there, he and Edna book a couple of rooms at the Old Owl Inn, upon the request of the inspector. Katie gets sent to the hospital after a breakdown, and this just happens to be the same hospital that puts dead bodies into sci-fi freezer coffins, and has terribly violent newborns. These are a recent development, all from the same area, with no clear signs as to why they're out for blood. As I'm sure you and George have guessed, it's because of that machine that was on the farm. According to the guys running it, it's completely harmless. The radiation just causes the insects to go nuts and attack each other. Nothing bad can come from that. Well, that was a dead end. They do have those photographs to check out, but even those don't provide any concrete proof. And now the inspector is convinced that George and Edna are directly involved in Martin's murder too. It's at this point that George has had just about enough of this Guthrie the ghost or zombie talk, so he takes Edna to the cemetery where they buried him. They do find him, or rather where he's supposed to be, as well as something else. And now they're locked in there with Guthrie. Guess that proves George wrong. I guess it isn't just the machine that can resurrect the dead. George and Edna do manage to get out, with a little help from police officer Craig, played by Giorgio Trestini, but they're not out of the cemetery yet. Craig decides that their only chance of getting help is if he can make it to his radio outside. He essentially sacrifices himself trying to call the inspector for help, and George and Edna are next on the menu. Now George has figured out that it is the radioactive machine that is causing all of this. So George goes to fuck the whole thing up while Edna heads back to her sister's house. As it turns out, the radius of the machine has gone from 1 mile to 5. So the threat of the recently risen dead has increased substantially. The inspector has discovered Craig's disemboweled body and escalates his suspicion of George and Edna's involvement in Martin's murder to full-blown Satan worship practices. So if any of his men come across either of them, they have been ordered to arrest or kill them. Upon arriving at her sister's house, Edna is attacked by Martin and barely escapes. George finally meets up with her and gets her to the gas station before going back to the house, intending on making sure Martin does not rise again. Unfortunately, the police are waiting for him and immediately take him into custody for interrogation. At the same time, Martin is taken to the hospital where he proceeds to bring other bodies to life and wreak havoc on the faculty. This includes killing Dr. Duffield, played by Vicente Vega, and Katie, who then then attacks Edna. George, now being pursued by the police, rushes to the hospital and lights some zombies on fire. The dead are highly flammable. Remember that. Unfortunately, he's too late to save Edna. After these grisly events, the inspector is being hailed as a hero for stopping a spree of murders. The radiation machine is back in operation, and oh yeah, one more thing. And with that little taste of karma, the credits roll. There's plenty of queasy gore here for gorehounds, and zombie fans, and it all genuinely looks good. Similarly, the look of the zombies themselves I like. They meet the expected characteristics, but are also a bit different. One of the elements I like most about this film is the sound design. There's the genuinely unpleasant ringing and humming of the radiation machine, and the noises that the zombies make. That is quite unsettling on its own, but I also learned where part of the inspiration for that came from, which was Jorge Grau hearing what his father sounded like while he was dying. Similarly, Giuliano Sorgini's scoring is eerie and unsettling on its own too. It's distinct to the film and gives moments of upbeat 70s music, as well as howling wind and dread-filled piano notes. There are quite a few visually interesting settings we're given. I can always appreciate a good cemetery scene where tension and chaos unfold. Stick with me here. Normally, I would say that the digital effects in a 70s film are not fantastic. They're obvious and cheesy. However, what little there are here actually contribute to the overall retro vibe. This movie has a distinct 70s flavor to it that I enjoy. Oftentimes, I find myself less than impressed by the slow variety of zombies. I don't mean they don't look good or act well. I mean they look relatively easy to evade or defeat. Not here! These zombies feel like a proper threat even when it's just one. And you sincerely do not want to let one of them get their hands on you. It takes a bit to get going into the more interesting and action-oriented moments. So if you're wanting a movie where zombies run amok and kill a bunch of people in various gross ways right off, this likely isn't the movie to grab. Can the different layers of the plot be a little difficult to follow? At times, sure. You've got George and his vacation/meetup for the weekend, involving those antique items we never get a full explanation for, Edna's quest to get to her sister, Katie and Martin's turmoil, the radiation machine on the farm, the inspector trying to figure all of this out, and of course, the living dead themselves. While the characters are easy to follow along with and get some depth from, some can certainly come across as annoying. Like George and the inspector. George is just one of those brooding assholes you kinda wanna smack across the back of the head once in a while, while the inspector is someone I would happily witness some karmic revenge be set upon. With all that being said, I'm giving The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue 8 out of 10 bloody thumbs up. It's interesting to see a foreign-made zombie film that isn't just directly copying in George A. Romero's footsteps, but making its own way. It's more of a response, and it does something that Romero's zombies don't, which is give a reason behind their rise and actions. That can be seen as either good or bad, but I think it works well with the plot. On that subject, there are a few messages that stand out. There's the whole fucking around with nature in order to change it, resulting in a huge blowback to humanity. Another is the current and previous generations butting heads and refusing to listen to one another or respect each other. And finally, there's the sense of people being so caught up and busy with their own little worlds that they don't care what else is going on around them or what someone else wants. So there's some morals to be had here if you want them. If not, it's still a good zombie flick. During a time where zombie movies were rather popular and more filmmakers were trying to capitalize on something that Romero paved the way for, The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue manages to stand out. I would recommend The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue to zombie fans, 70s horror enthusiasts, gorehounds, and anyone who doesn't have tinnitus. See you later. If you're looking for more zombie goodness, then check out my reviews of these movies. Thank you to my patrons Michael Musale, Bronson Wright Wolf, Diana Moe, Sean Sheridan, Raiders AK, Angel X Minx 88 for supporting the channel.